If you have topics you would like to have us discuss on the Aging Well podcast, please click on the links in the episode description to send us a text or record your message or comments. We'd love to hear from you and how we can help you age well. If you benefit from the Aging Well podcast and would like to support the content financially, please click on the Support the Show link or support our affiliates and advertisers. Welcome to the Aging Well podcast. I'm Jeff Armstrong here with Corbin Bruton. In this and the episodes that follow, we will share candid discussions on aging and hear from the experts. We are here to inform and encourage as we experience, well, aging. In this episode of the Aging Well podcast, we dive into a provocative claim from the Muscle Journal that, quote, weightlifting is dead, unquote. We critically examine the article's bold assertions about the limitations and risks of traditional weightlifting and discuss the touted benefits of the so-called Power First method. Along the way, we explore the science behind compensatory acceleration training and the use of bands and chains in strength training, offering a balanced perspective on these methods and their relevance for anyone looking to maintain strength and health as they seek to age well.
Dr. Armstrong, did you hear the news?
What news is that?
A moment of silence, please. Weightlifting is dead.
Really now?
Well, yeah, according to the Muscle Journal.
Muscle Journal? That is a peer-reviewed journal? I don't think so. Of course, we'll share a link in the episode description, but it appears to be pure marketing bullshit.
Yeah, well, tell us what you really think.
Well, if you insist. The article, and I put my trademarked air quotes around article, is titled, Weightlifting is Dead. Here's what works in 2024.
Yeah, I agree with the air quotes. I love the section titles as well, heading like, The Crushing Truth About Weightlifting, and Enter the Power First Method, a game changer in muscle growth.
And scientific backing. The proof is in the research. Interesting that they cite, quote, research studies published in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research and the Journal of Human Kinetics discovered that the Power First method resulted in a threefold increase in strength compared to using free weights alone, end quote. I'm less familiar with the Journal of Human Kinetics, but I have reviewed manuscripts for the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research. The latter is the main journal of the National Strength and Conditioning Association. Now, we'll circle back to this research, but first, what does the, quote, article, unquote, report?
There are those air quotes again. Well, it begins with the crushing truth about weightlifting.
And what is the crushing truth about weightlifting?
The author makes 4 claims. 1, static resistance is a joke. 2, injury central. 3, vampire workouts, and half-baked muscle fatigued. These are all emphasized with exclamation marks.
Yeah, they sound like scientific claims.
Yeah, I'm sensing that hint of sarcasm there.
Just a hint? Let's take these one at a time. Static resistance is a joke.
Yeah, the writer states that traditional weights provide the same resistance throughout the entire movement. This doesn't match your natural strength curve, leading to weak muscle activation and slow gains. Your muscles deserve better.
First, let me clarify that static resistance is not what I would consider traditional weights. I think of traditional weights as dynamic resistance. Static resistance, to me, is isometrics. It is false to say that, quote, traditional weights provide the same resistance throughout the entire movement, end quote. It is true that the weight remains the same, with some exceptions, but the resistance changes. It is basic biomechanics. The force required of the muscle changes as the movement arm changes. I would agree, though, that traditional weights do not match the natural strength curve. That is what Art Jones attempted to overcome in the 1970s with his knotless machines. How the strength curve and application of force affects muscle activation and gains is complex. And I think we must consider the goals of the weight training and the principle of specificity.
Yeah, I think it's important to note that the goals of the bodybuilder, the athlete, and the lifter who just wants to age well, they're really quite different. But the writer also states that lifting heavy puts insane strain on your joints and tendons. The results? Sky-high injury risk that can bench you for weeks or even months. And who needs that?
Yeah, again, we are back to goals and specificity.
Yeah, and lifting heavy is relative.
That's right. There is a huge difference between a 1 repetition maximum of 200 pounds on the bench press and 500 pounds regarding stress on the joints.
Yeah, it's called progressive overload.
That's right. The joints and tendons are going to adapt to increasing loads over time. It's true that too much load on the joints and tendons can result in injury, but it's more a matter of proper technique and load and adequate recovery than simply the load itself or the training modality. What does the writer say about time vampire workouts?
Effective weightlifting demands long, grueling gym session. For those with busy lives, this is a disaster. Say goodbye to your social life.
To this, I would say, if you're spending more than an hour a day in the gym, you are doing it for more than your health. A little paraphrasing of Kenneth Cooper there, but there are many ways to get gains from weightlifting without spending hours in the gym. To say that, quote, effective weightlifting demands long, grueling gym sessions, end quote, is an overstatement.
Yeah, and we've talked about that a lot in this podcast. Like, there's a way to utilize your time effectively in the gym. Like, you can still get in and get out and hit all of your goals. You just kind of have to go in with a game plan, and you need to know what your goals are.
Right, and I often teach, cut the bullshit.
Jeez.
I mean, seriously, there are a lot of exercises or a lot of activities we do in the gym that are far less effective than doing, say, just the basic compound exercises. We talked about the basic 5 or 6, however you want to kind of divide it out, but doing and don't do your 7.
Superior 7? Yeah.
I knew that was going to come up. But you look at a squat variation. You're getting much of your lower extremity, even some upper body, depending on what type of squat variation you do. You have the deadlift or deadlift variations. You have the bench press or a push variation, horizontal push, overhead press or vertical push, and then you have your pull variations, which can include multiple different angles of pull. You get those basic exercises in, you're getting all of the muscles of the body. You're also getting bicep, tricep work, you're getting some shoulder work in there. Even your calves, you might want to do a little bit more accessory work in that workout. But again, address your weaknesses. If I have really tiny biceps and I want to build those up to help support my pulling exercises, or I just want to look a little bit better, do some curls for the girls, then yeah, do some of that. But you don't have to go in, okay, it's bicep day at the gym and I'm going to do 2 hours of bicep curls. That's not time effective, and it's really not, unless you are a bodybuilder, not necessary. Again, if you're lifting for more than an hour a day, you're doing it for more than your health. You're doing it purely for aesthetics or maybe athletic performance, but I would even argue for an athlete to be spending an hour or more a day in the gym, they're doing it to their detriment, because there are far better things that they could be doing to improve sports performance, including practice for their sports and those types of things that are going to take some time. And so let's use our time effectively. Let's get in. If we got to warm up, do a quick warm up, 5-10 minutes maybe, get through your weights, do some stretching afterwards, be very specific and intentive in your stretching exercises, and then get the hell out of the gym, go home. Maybe go in the afternoon, do your cardio exercise. good, short, intensive cardio exercise. But we're talking about weightlifting here, so let's focus on weightlifting. You know, it doesn't take a long period of time in the gym, and you're going to be just as effective. You know, how many sets are you doing? How many repetitions are you doing relative to your goals? Get it done. You know, you can superset in there to manage time a little bit more effectively in the gym. So this whole notion that we're wasting a lot of time in the gym and, you know, effective weight training demands long, grueling gym sessions is just nonsense. It doesn't take long periods of time in the gym to get effective results.
No, especially even if you take, you know, the 5x5 or the Superior 7 or even just the Big 4, right? If you use squats, deadlifts, a bench press, and then a pull, whether it's pull-ups or lat pull-down, those 4 alone, there's so much literature out there that you can completely just recomp your body so you can get the aesthetics that you need with not as much time, but overall health. Like you're doing so much in those 4 movements that the literature that backs it up. There's so much of it out there that those 4 alone, you can see, you can feel, you can live the benefits by just including those 4 and getting in and out. I mean, obviously, do it intensely. You don't just use, I'm just going to use a little tiny weight, unless your body needs to do that, right?
Well,
everyone's going to be different.
Tiny weight is relative, you know?
Right.
If I go to the gym and pick up a 5, there's very few exercises that a 5-pound weight is going to be effective for me. But, you know, an 80-year-old grandmother going to the gym for the first time, that 5-pound dumbbell might be pretty heavy. But, you know, if you're doing it 3 months, 6 months, a year down the line, and you're still using that same weight, you've wasted a lot of time in the gym. You know, you got to have what's referred to as progressive overload, where you're adding a little bit more to your workout each session, because in order for a body system to adapt, it has to be stressed to a level greater than what it is accustomed to.
So what about the statement, weightlifting only fatigues the start of your strength curve, leaving the rest unworked? You're not even close to maximizing your muscle growth.
Honestly, that makes no sense to me from a physiological point of view. Perhaps they mean to say that it is, quote, weightlifting only fatigues the start of the range of motion, unquote. But even that statement has some faults. Let's begin with, what is fatigue?
Fatigue is what makes cowards of us all.
True, but I mean physiologically.
Oh, okay. Well, fatigue may be defined as the inability to maintain power output or force during repeated muscle contractions. Muscle fatigue is defined as the decrease in muscle force production resulting from physical work. Specifically, fatigue is the reduced ability to perform work.
Correct. You've obviously paid attention in physiology of exercise class.
Yeah, I was a little prepared today.
So fatigue will be greatest where the greatest force is required. It is not necessarily linear, as the writer implies. So what is this game changer in muscle growth, the power first method?
Well, the article doesn't say much, but you must watch a video.
And the video tells you that you must buy their one-of-a-kind product to get the results. Before diving into the video, what does the article say?
The Power First method addresses the limitations to traditional weightlifting with an innovative approach that has already gained the trust of top bodybuilders and fitness models. Here's why it's revolutionizing muscle growth. Number 2, dynamic research. The Power First method provides resistance that increases as you move through the range of motion. This means you're matching your natural strength curve, providing more resistance where you're strong and less where you're the weakest. This dynamic resistance leads to more efficient muscle fatigue and growth. Number 3, full strength curve fatigue. By fully fatiguing your entire strength curve from the beginning to the end of each rep, the power first method ensures that you're maximizing muscle activation. This comprehensive fatigue is why studies have shown it to be 3 times more effective than weightlifting alone. Number 4, efficient workouts. One of the most remarkable aspects of the Power First method is that it delivers better results in a fraction of time. With just 10 minutes a day, you can achieve a workout that's more effective than an hour of traditional weight training. This efficiency makes it easier to stay consistent and integrate exercise into your daily routine.
And of course, this is followed by a deceptive photograph of the results.
Yeah, that guy doesn't look that much different pre and post, other than he's getting a little bit more tan and a little bit more of a pump.
And maybe before talking about the video, we should discuss the studies that have shown the Power First method to be 3 times more effective than weightlifting alone.
There aren't any citations in the article, but if you click on the link to the video, there is an extensive reference list.
Yeah, interestingly, few of the articles seem to be specifically related to the Power First method. I will give them this: they do at least provide citations.
Yeah, but do any of them actually reference the product?
Well, the article by Anderson and others, The Effects of Combining Elastic and Free Weight Resistance on Strength and Power in Athletes, does report a 3 times greater gain in squat strength using combined elastic and free weight resistance versus standard free weight exercise. However, the benefit was only 2 times greater for the bench press. And this is not using the product promoted by the Power First method.
Sounds like support for compensatory acceleration training.
It does, and remind me to circle back to CAT training. The elastic bands used in this study were the BNS bungee system from Power Up USA in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Bergquist and others used TheraBands for resistance and showed mixed effects on muscle activation. Colado and others also used TheraBands and compared elastic bands versus weight machines for sedentary middle-aged women. Craig and others examined the effects of progressive resistance training on growth hormone and testosterone levels in young and elderly subjects using Nautilus equipment. Kramer and Ratatnis, in a review article, focused on hormonal responses to resistance exercise. And the rest of the cited research, likewise, is not about the Power First method. I discussed my epigenetics test with True Diagnostic co-founder Hannah Wendt in episode 162. Epigenetic testing measures baseline and changes in your pace of aging, giving you the power to steer your anti-aging or health and wellness journey in the right direction. I learned that I am aging well. Click on the affiliate link in the episode description, use the promo code AGEWELL, and receive a 12% discount on your epigenetics test and monitor your pace of aging.
So is the Power First method BS?
I would say that it is just one method among many to do resistance exercise for aging well.
So you wanted to circle back to compensatory acceleration training, or CAT.
Yes, and thanks for the reminder.
What is compensatory acceleration training?
Compensatory acceleration training is a strength training technique where the athlete focuses on exerting maximal force through the entire range of motion during an exercise, regardless of the weight being lifted. The primary goal is to accelerate the bar or the weight as quickly as possible, especially during the easier portions of the lift, to maximize muscle recruitment and power output. This method helps in improving explosive strength and speed and is particularly beneficial for athletes who require high levels of power and performance in their sports.
CAT was originated by Dr. Squat, Dr. Fred Hatfield.
Yes, Dr. Hatfield was a renowned powerlifter and sports scientist who advocated for the use of CAT to enhance strength and power in athletes. His approach emphasized the importance of exerting maximal force throughout the entire range of motion in the lift to optimize muscle engagement and performance.
So, obviously, giving maximum effort when you're doing that push movement, especially in a squat, is critical, especially to creating that power in the resistance. But what about on the decline? I feel like a lot of literature out there shows that study on the decline or on the negative also has great impact on hypertrophy and muscle growth.
Well, again, we're talking specificity here. Concentric is where we're exerting power and explosiveness. And so that is going to require maximal force being generated at maximal speed. And if you recall from physiology of exercise, kind of the optimal rate of movement is going to be between about 200 and 300 degrees per second when we're talking about optimizing power. So we want to be quickly moving through that, that range of motion. So what Fred Hatfield advocated for was, as you're doing, say, a squat, you are performing that squat at your normal weight, but you're going to be as explosive as possible. So rather than just we push through the hard part and then we get into the upper part of the squat where momentum could carry us, we're continuing to accelerate, and so the muscles are continuing to contract more forcefully at a higher velocity throughout the range of motion. And that helps to develop power. Now, when we look at the eccentric portion, the eccentric is very important for muscle hypertrophy because there's several different components that contribute to muscle hypertrophy, two of which are tension in the muscle as well as muscle damage. And the eccentric portion, we get kind of both of those occurring. So as we're lowering the weight more slowly, no matter what the weight is, we're putting more tension in the muscle, which is going to have a greater stimulus for growth. It also, because the muscle is attempting to contract as it's being elongated, there tends to be a lot more disruption of the cross bridges. And we don't want to get too physiological here in this episode, but that tends to cause damage within the muscle, which is a stimulus for healing and hypertrophy. The healed muscle, in response to that damage, is going to grow thicker myofilaments and become stronger and thicker and more resistant to that future damage. And so those are really two different components of the lift. And when we're talking about CAT training, it's not necessarily emphasizing the eccentric or the lowering portion of the lift. It's really just focusing on how we're performing the concentric portion. And so when I prescribe resistance training, I will also emphasize tempo in the lift. And so for hypertrophy, I like a slower descent, up to maybe 4 seconds, even slower. I mean, you can go really light in weight. There are some protocols where you might do a 30-second eccentric contraction. That's hard. I mean, you can just try body weight, sitting in a squat very slowly down, and you're going to feel it a lot more. And so that eccentric portion can help to emphasize the hypertrophy aspect of the lift. Also get us stronger in being able to receive forces. So when it comes to jumping, plyometric type activities, we can receive more force so that we can turn that into a more explosive concentric contraction. But when we're looking at explosiveness, that increasing the force as we're driving through the range of motion could have a very positive effect in power. And so typically when I think of cat training or even training with bands attached to the weights, that is going to have an impact a little bit more on our power development, more so necessarily than hypertrophy. Now, I see what they're driving at with this is that you're keeping the muscle under a more constant tension throughout the range of motion. And that may have some benefits for resistance training.
So how do bands come in?
Well, as the lifter moves through the range of motion, the resistance increases due to the added tension from the bands or the added weights if we include chains, because when we talk about compensatory training, chains can also be used. This progressive resistance ensures that the athlete must continue to apply maximal force throughout the range of motion. And even as the exercise becomes mechanically easier. And so use of bands helps in maximizing muscle activation, improving strength at various points in the lift, and promoting explosive power by maintaining high levels of force output.
And this can also be accomplished using chains.
Yes, Louis Simmons, the renowned strength coach and founder of Westside Barbell, is credited with popularizing the use of chains in compensatory acceleration training. He introduced this method to help lifters manage variable resistance through the range of motion, ensuring constant force application and improving strength and power. Simmons' innovative training techniques have had a pretty significant impact on powerlifting and strength training communities.
So it's really compensatory acceleration training we're talking about, and not the power first method.
Exactly. As we look at the literature that they provide, that really is addressing compensatory acceleration training, more specifically kind of using the bands, because I don't think any of the articles actually talked about chains. But with the chains, what we're seeing with the chains is the resistance increases because as you're doing the lift, you're lifting more and more links of the chain off of the ground, and that adds to the weight that you are lifting. And so, in a sense, as we're moving through that range of motion, we're having to apply more force as we get through the range of motion, which is similar to the bands, which is also similar to what Fred Hatfield was doing with the original thought of compensatory acceleration training. And that's also what the power first method is doing. Just in every lift, you are progressively increasing the tension as we move through that range of motion. So we're not necessarily following force curves or strength curves. We're simply just applying a greater resistance as we move through the range of motion. Now, it's not necessarily a bad method, but to isolate it as being the power first method, I think, does a bit of a disservice to the literature. And it also kind of stretches that literature a little bit too far when it says like a 3 times, because that 3 times was with doing a squat, the bench was only 2 times, and it wasn't even using the same technology that Power First is promoting. Power First is basically, applying a resistance to a bar that is entirely rubber resistance. Elastic resistance. It's not incorporating the weight as well.
So what you're saying is weightlifting is not dead.
Weightlifting is very much alive and well.
All right, we resurrected it. That's it. All right, time to go home. Just kidding. Well, what about the power first method?
Again, just another product we can incorporate in our resistance exercise for aging well.
Do you recommend it?
It can have usefulness for some. It can be an alternative to a full home gym. It will be limited, however, as strength progresses. I would still prefer weights with the complement of bands or chains.
And if the listener clicks the link to the video, they can purchase the X-Bar and Power First bands.
Last I checked, you can get these and a bunch of extras for just $247. An advertised $1,741.97 value.
Jeez. Wow, what a deal. Do you use bands or chains in your training?
I do use chains. I don't have the bands per se. I will incorporate those some. They're just a little bit more cumbersome to kind of attach to your weight systems and things like that. And I just find that the chains would be a bit more effective. I got chains for, I think it was Christmas this past year. And one thing I like about the chains is with my shoulder, I have a little bit of lack of stability in the shoulder based on some early injuries, and using the chains in conjunction with the Mark Bell slingshot, I am able to go a little bit heavier load, and I'm underloading or kind of unloading the joints and the muscles a little bit more at the bottom of my bench press, which takes that stress off my shoulder joint, but then as I'm pressing through it, I'm adding more weight, and so I'm getting a little bit better strength, a little bit better hypertrophy out of that lift without putting a lot of undue stress on my shoulder joint. I do love it. I use it with the athletes that I train, especially as we get closer to season and we start emphasizing power and acceleration a lot more. We'll incorporate the chains because it does provide that compensatory acceleration training. It's an easy system to be able to just slap it on, and you don't have to worry about band attachments and some of those types of things. But there are some really great systems out there that I would use if I had access to them. So it's just, and I could begin to kind of list off different products, but there's tons of different brands that you can get. It's mainly just, either those bands that you can buy, just the round rubber bands. You can use TheraBands attached, but TheraBands typically don't come in high enough resistance. You can get the kind of bungee cord elastic bands that have carabiner attachments at the end, so you can kind of hook them onto things. There's many different ways that you can use them, but yeah, I do use chains in my training, and I do find it effective, and I do recommend it for people that have a little extra in their budget to be able to incorporate that. Now, would I use strictly just the bands? I mean, in something like this X-Bar training, to me, wouldn't be too bad for travel. If it's something that I can take with me on the road and have bands, and I can get that resistance training in. But I actually prefer free weights over the band training, just because it's going to allow me greater resistance. It takes an awful lot of bands to generate, enough weight for, a 300-pound plus Zercher squat or something like that. So, what about yourself?
I just stick to free weights. I'm a big fan of free weights and bands. I don't really use bands unless I'm trying to warm up the muscle. I'll just kind of use it just to get a little blood flow to the muscles in the beginning. Other than that, I really don't use bands. I just kind of stick to free weights.
So according to research, you're leaving some gains on the table there.
I know. Man. I don't know what I'm going to do with myself.
I think what it really comes down to is what equipment do you have available to you. The more you can access some of these advanced methods of training, the more effective your training can become. But the reality is most of us in our society, we have, I think it's fewer than 50% of the U.S. population exercise at all. And when it comes to meeting the minimum guidelines for physical activity, we're up to maybe about 75% of the population are not hitting those gains. Only about 23 to 25% are hitting the minimum guidelines. And so that means we're at probably 10 to 15% at best percentage of the population are actually exceeding those guidelines and doing the type of resistance type of training that is going to give them significant gains and the opportunity to maintain muscle mass as they attempt to age well. And so I think the key first is just do something. And if this method of training works for you and you have access to it and you're going to spend the $247 instead of $1,700 plus for the equipment, I would not spend $700 for this equipment. I'm sorry, but I think that's the whole point. It's a short-term opportunity now for $247. I would guess that a year from now, that same opportunity would be available to the individual, that they never actually sell it for the $1,700. But use what you have access to, even if it's only body weight. It's resistance training that is important. The modality is less than half of the benefit. Just do something is going to give you gains. How you start to tweak your training is going to give you a little bit better gains, and you keep refining it. The more complexity you add to it, the smaller the real added benefit is going to be.
All right, so weightlifting is not dead. It is alive and thriving, and apparently aging well. I hope that the listeners have found this conversation informative. Remember, it's less about how you resistance train. It's more important that you simply do something to stress the muscles to grow and maintain strength. Contribute some time to resistance exercise, and most importantly, keep aging well.
Thank you for listening. I hope you benefited from today's podcast, and until next time, keep aging well.